Hello everyone, this is Pastor Joe of Sea Life Ministries, and today we're going to continue in our study in the book of Philippians, and we're in chapter 2, verse 25, but I did want to point out something from last time before we get started. In verse 23, this is Paul speaking about sending Timothy to the church at Philippi. It says, "Therefore I hope to send him at once as soon as I see how it goes with me. But I trust in the Lord that I myself shall also come shortly." And the reason I wanted to point that out is in verse 25, we are going to be introduced to another Christian man, which, well, without further ado, let's start off with verse 25, and I will introduce him. "Yet I considered it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier, but your messenger and the one who ministered to my need, since he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick." Now, Epaphroditus was a native to Philippi, and his name meant lovely or loving, and he was sent to Paul with gifts. We'll read more about that in chapter 4, and he was to remain and serve Paul as he could. Now, when he talks about messenger, the word comes from the same word that in the English is apostle, but he was not an apostle of Christ, but an apostle, meaning sent one in the broader sense, that he was an apostle of the church of Philippi. And I find it interesting in verse 26, where it talks about Epaphroditus being or longing for everyone in Philippi because he was distressed because he heard that everyone in Philippi heard that he was sick. And really, the term distress could also mean confused, chaotic, heavy state of restlessness that results from a time of turmoil or great trauma. Epaphroditus was more concerned about the Philippians worrying about him than he was about his own difficult situation. And then it says that he was sick almost unto death. And really, perhaps by the time that he arrived in Rome, he had become seriously ill. Now was recovered enough to go back home to labor with the church, who needed him more than Paul did. And now, going to verse 27, "For indeed he was sick almost unto death, but God had mercy on him, not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I sent him the more eagerly, that when you see him again you may rejoice, and I may be less sorrowful. Receive him therefore in the Lord with all gladness, and hold such men in esteem, because for the work of Christ he came close to death, not regarding his life, to supply that was lacking in your service towards me." And I find it interesting how, the end of this chapter, it talks about Paul and Epaphroditus being concerned about the people in Philippi because they know that Paul is in prison and Epaphroditus was sick, that they were very concerned about that. And just thinking about it, I can't really think of any TV shows or movies where when someone is sick or, in prison or something, that they are concerned about another group of people. So that's just something interesting I was thinking about while reading that. But now let's continue on with chapter 3, verse 1. "Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. For me to write the same things to you is not tedious, but for you it is safe. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of mutilation." And when Paul talks about or starts this chapter with the word "finally," it's really that he has reached a transition point, not a conclusion, since we still have all of chapter 3 and chapter 4 to go through. And when he says rejoice in the Lord, that's a familiar theme for Paul to write in his epistles. And in chapters 1 and 2, he did use the word rejoice, but this is the first time that he added the phrase in the Lord. Then when he says writing the same things. What he is about to teach them in the verses that follow, he had previously given them instruction in regarding their opponents. And then, where at the end of verse 1 it says, "But for you it is safe," I'm thinking, well, of course it's safe. It's a letter or epistle, but that's not what it means. What it really is, it's a safeguard to protect the Philippians from succumbing to the false teachers, which, they were really heavy back then. Verse 2, where he talks about beware of the dogs. Back then, or during the first century, dogs roamed the streets and were essentially wild scavengers. Because dogs were such filthy animals, the Jewish loved to refer to Gentiles as dogs. Yet here, Paul refers to Jews, especially Judaizers, as dogs to describe their sinful, vicious, and uncontrolled character. And then he warns them of evil workers. And this is, when the Judaizers prided themselves on being workers of righteousness. Yet Paul described their works as evil, since any attempt to please God by one's own efforts and draw attention away from Christ's accomplished redemption is the worst kind of wickedness. Also meaning, what Christ did on the cross, they're taking the attention away from that and really putting it on themselves. And then when he talks about mutilation, what they were talking about there is, it really means to cut around. This term means to cut off or to cut down, like the prophets of Baal and the pagans who mutilated their bodies in their frenzied rituals, which were actually forbidden in the Old Testament. And here, the Judaizers' circumcision was ironically no spiritual symbol, it was merely physical mutilation. So I think we're going to end there, because next time I'd like to touch on a little more of the subject of circumcision, where the Bible also talks about circumcised of heart, and there are other meanings and uses. So until then, I think we're going to leave it here. I thank you for your continued interest, and until next time, Lord bless you and have a great day.